what's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. So let me say that again. What's going on within your spouse's heart, what's going on within Christi's heart matters more than what's going on between the both of us.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christi Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we're talking about marriage. Before we jump in, here's a word from our sponsors. Hey everybody, Josh Straub here with Famous at Home. We want to introduce you to the Famous at Home Starter Bundle. This is something we created just for you. All you have to do is click the button to sign up to receive our workbook, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage. You'll also get a feelings chart handout that you can implement with your kids and with your spouse. And you'll also receive the 100 Commonly Held Values worksheet so that you can sit down with your family and discuss the values that you want to set as a family that will provide vision for how and you want to lead your family in the direction that you're going to head in. So you get those 3 things right away as soon as you sign up. In addition to that, we will send to you our top podcast episodes on marriage, parenting, and family, the most listened to and the most foundational for developing emotional connection with your loved ones. You'll also receive past newsletters, our exclusive weekly newsletter. You'll be enrolled to receive that on an ongoing basis. These are real-time newsletters of what's happening in our lives and what we're doing and implementing to be famous at home that we want to give to you, just weekly nuggets to keep us equipped every single week. And then you'll also receive the weekly podcast episodes as well. This starter bundle is all free. We want to give it to you. Just click the link to sign up. Welcome back. We are talking about marriage today, getting on the same team with your spouse. This is something we've talked about. We talk about this a lot, but we just really felt it important to get back to what matters most, and that is our relationship with each other, because we're just hearing a lot. I mean, we're in a busy part of the year, right? It's springtime. We just come out of Easter. Kids are getting ready to do end of school stuff. Whether you homeschool or your kids go to school, there's just end of school stuff going on. There's activities. There's a lot happening at this time of year. And I think one of the biggest things that we just are hearing right now is, all these good things are going on, and we've got all these opportunities and ministry opportunities and all these things, all good things are happening. But yet at the end of the day, one of the things we really want to focus on is our marriage, and we're just feeling like our marriage isn't doing as great as we would like it to be doing. And so we wanted to talk, how do we get on the same team? How do we actually come together and get on the same team with our spouse and just provide some practical conversation around it? We will talk about that today, and Christi and I will talk about that in relation to the ways that we have really strengthened our marriage through the years, the way that we continue to do that. But I also just want to say this too, that this is in the Famous at Home book. So we wrote a book called Famous at Home, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage in a World Competing for Your Time, Attention, and Identity. It's a mouthful, but it is true. Our world is competing for our time, attention, and identity, doing everything that it can to distract us from the very things that matter most, and that is our relationships. Our relationships beginning with God, our relationships with our spouse, and our relationships with our kids. And because I think the enemy subtly comes in and says, hey, chase this. This will give you identity. This will give you purpose. This will give you mission. This will give you vision. This will give you value. This will give you value. This will give you worth. And it's about you, and it's about your thing. And the reality is that's not at all what the kingdom of God is about. The kingdom of God is about us experiencing Jesus' love for us, experiencing the Father's love for us, and that being our identity, knowing that in Him we please Him just by who we are. Psalm 103 is a great example of this. He knows that we are from dust, and to dust we will return. He knows, and yet His love for us is as far as from the east as from the west, as high as the heavens to earth. And so everything begins there. And I think for us to be able to recognize that and to live out of that identity. So I'm going back to the book. it really hones in on very practical ways that you can build this relationship with your spouse, with your kids. And it goes into way more detail than what we'll do today. But we just wanted to give some overviews and just some reminders for those of you who have been listening for a long time. We just want to thank you. You can go to famousathome.com/podcast to leave us topics. You guys have been leaving such amazing topics. Keep them coming, because we are putting together a podcast schedule based on those topics coming up that are just awesome. So we get our content, we get our ideas from you, the listener, because we want to serve you, our podcast family. And so please go there and scroll down to the bottom of the podcast page and go ahead and just tell us what topics you want us to talk about and are most relevant to you. We'd love for you to be able to do that.
Getting on the same team.
Getting on the same team.
I didn't know if you remembered what
I did.
I
I knew I went to that, and then I was like, okay, now what do I say next? Because I wasn't sure where my train of thought was going. So we're going to get on the same team in our marriage.
On the same team in your marriage. And I think this is something that feels really basic in concept, but much more difficult in practice, because
Good call.
We often see our opponent as our spouse, which is why that's why people call us and come in, for coaching, because it's like, we're just, they feel the conflict between them. And so often the conflict that comes between two people is actually, that's the opponent. It's not one another, right? And so it's getting into the same locker room is what we talk about, is because the only way to defeat your opponent is to be on the same team and recognize, this is my greatest teammate, my greatest ally. And as I turn to him as a partner in battle, and not not my battle partner, not who I'm battling.
Partner. The way you said partner was really
do
country.
I sound like I'm
good.
Tennessee?
My partner.
We're
going to the square dance.
I do really love living in Tennessee now. All my Canadian friends are like, who are you? Who have you become? I can also speak Canadian still. So I can speak very clearly.
You can,
and enunciate. Yes, I can. I find, anyway. So I will talk to my friends back home, and I'm like, you speak so properly. But as teammates in marriage, you recognize, and you have to call out the opponent. So we always start with, it's naming your opponents. So what are the opponents that are coming in between your relationship? That could be a child. It could be work. It could be sex. It could be money. It could be stressors. It could be, maybe one of you are struggling with anxiety or depression. Maybe you've lost a parent recently. There are many things, or even parenting struggles, like the way you view parenting is different. Those are the things, those are the opponents.
If you're in the military, it's deployment, right?
Yeah.
Or a work schedule, a difficult work schedule. There's all these opponents that come against us, against our intimacy in our marriage, against the connectedness that we have. I think the word connectedness might be a good word for that, where it and these can be good things. They can also be bad things, like pornography or an affair or something like that, but they can also be good things, because they're just things that come between you, and, for example, like my in-laws, Christi's parents, were just with us. And, when you have people living in your house, that in and of itself, inevitably, no matter how amazing your parents or in-laws are, it inevitably, when you have other people in your house, it influences the two of you and how you connect. And you have to be able to recognize and name what is the thing that's coming against us right now in our connectedness. Now, your parents do a great job of forcing us to go on a date and saying, hey, we're taking the kids, you guys go. So we actually connect a lot when her parents are here. But it's still, there's dynamics, right? There's things that you have to be able to call out. Like our greatest opponent, I think our greatest opponent wasn't, the greatest opponent that we were first able to name came in weighing 8 pounds and 1 ounce. And that was our son, Landon, because we just weren't ready for the colic and the acid reflux and the not sleeping through the night.
Who is?
We weren't ready for that difficulty of those years. But you've got to name it. If you don't name it and bring it out into the light, it will live there and it can become an elephant in your marriage. And that was our first opponent, actually, was church and where we were going to church and how we did church. But it became an elephant for a long time in our marriage. And it would just waddle in the living room on a Sunday morning and rear its head, where Christi didn't love where we were going to church. I was fine with it. And I'm seeing Christi through this lens of, well, it's our duty to go to church, and she hates the word duty, and that's not freedom and in Christ. And there was a lot there, and we talk about it in the book. But until we named it, and until we actually repented of our own sins surrounding it, it just became an elephant that I think a lot of times in marriage, we maintain the status quo because at least we know what we're going to get. We at least know that if we bring it up, it could open the floodgates. Right. And in fear of doing that, I'd rather just not bring it up. I'd rather not talk about it.
And I think that's that's what an elephant is, right? It's this huge presence in the room, but no one mentions it. So there's a lot of elephants that do come in, especially in family relationships, because they've been tricky in the past. And so you've learned the protective mechanisms, and you have learned like that it doesn't go well if this is brought up, so we won't talk about it. And obviously we all know cognitively that's not the best way to handle it, but the body doesn't. The nervous system is like, heck no, that's not safe. I don't feel safe talking about it, so I'm not going to bring it up. So it makes sense that you have an elephant. And so to just sort of normalize that a little bit, that whatever that is for you, it makes sense that you've handled it that way, but to also approach it with the understanding that ignoring it might not be serving you best anymore. It might have worked for a time to let things cool off, but now it might be that you have a better coping strategy, and you are developing tools between the two of you, and a relationship that feels safe enough that you can talk about those things. And if it doesn't feel safe, that's something we do want to talk about too, because we talk about emotional safety a lot. It's a term not many people are familiar with, but ultimately it's what we all want in relationships. That's what we're looking for. The ability to be safe, to be who I am, to present my whole self, and I'm not going to be ridiculed or embarrassed or shut down or dismissed or rejected for who I am. That's what safety feels like. And I think we all know what it feels like to be unsafe. Those are the relationships where you're walking around on eggshells, where you're afraid of bringing up this thing or that thing because a bomb could go off or they could flip out. And I think so often we judge ourselves for being like, if you're a people pleaser, I would have say I have been a people pleaser. I think most of us are. But if you actually look at people pleasing for what it is, it's your way of protecting yourself from someone else's volatility. It actually really doesn't have so much to do with pleasing the other person. It's not that you're some passive person who just cares so much what other people think. That's not always and often the case. It's that when they explode, you don't feel safe. Or when they go ice cold or, stonewall you, you don't feel safe, which makes total sense, right? So of course you want to do whatever you can to sort of appease them, but that is more of an issue of their inability to self-regulate, right? They can't regulate themselves. And so that makes you unsafe. So you're taking it within your control to keep them regulated. And so to just understand, even if you feel that dynamic in your marriage, that makes sense. It makes a ton of sense. And you've learned to cope a certain way, and that becomes your dance, right? So I either avoid a topic or because that's going to make him explode, or that's what it's done in the past. And so it becomes this, we call it the dance, and talk about it as it is this repeated pattern that happens in relationships. And when you start to recognize the dance, it always makes sense. But to recognize that there are other ways, all we have to do is interrupt one person's step in the dance, and it changes the whole pattern.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that here in a second. We'll come back from the break, but I want to stick around, because there's one key phrase that I think will help you navigate all of this, from getting on the same team to naming your opponents to talking about your dance and recognizing your role in the dance. There's one simple way to be able to do this and really learn how to connect with each other, and we'll bring that up right after the break. Hey everybody, Josh Drop here with Famous at Home. I want to introduce you to something if you haven't already seen it. This is our new book, Famous at Home, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage in a World Competing for Your Time, Attention, and Identity. When a couple or a family comes to us and says, hey, Josh, we have a question. What do we do next? We always point to this book. This is our coaching playbook. This is the play-by-play strategies that we use to help families to be famous at home. And so if you have not picked up this book yet, we highly encourage you to get a copy. You can see a link in the show notes. You can click a link right here in the video, and we would love for you to be able to get a copy of this in your hands. If you want to go deeper than the podcast episodes, this is the way to do that. It's our way of walking alongside your family to help you be famous at home. Okay, so the one simple thing, the one thing that we, and I believe this to be the case, this is the foundation from everything that we do with couples, is the belief that when we get married, we become one flesh. And the Bible says to guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So when you get married as one flesh, you have one marital heart that you need to guard. And so the phrase that we use is that what's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. So let me say that again. What's going on within your spouse's heart, what's going on within Christi's heart matters more than what's going on between the both of us, which is why I believe that communication is often very overrated in relationships, because it's not what we're arguing about. Most of the time, our dance, the dance that we have, what we're arguing about isn't the issue. There are so many couples that we do coaching intensives with or coaching with who I'll connect with them and I'll say, okay, did you guys argue this week? And they're like, yeah, we had like 2 arguments, but we have no idea what they were about. But what we remember is how we felt with each other. That is the key. I know how I felt. I know how I felt by Christi speaking to me the way she did. I know how I felt by her being sarcastic, or by her, and she's not sarcastic, so that's why I can use that one. But whatever it is, tone of voice, by the way, the single greatest thing that couples argue over, this was recently found in a survey, is tone of voice and attitude. The number one reason that couples argue is tone of voice and attitude. It's not communication that matters as much as meta communication. Communicating about how we communicate. That's our dance. That's what Christi's talking about. But the way to talk about your dance is to own your role in the dance. It all starts by us looking at our own sin and repenting of our own sin and going, I am not showing up well with you.
Right.
I am not doing a great job showing up well with you. I can't change Christi, so the only thing I can influence is me and my behavior, and me taking 100% me taking 100% responsibility for my role in the conflict. When I do that, I can then start to change how I dance with Christi and not stepping on her feet.
Oh, that was a nice pun.
You like that?
I like that.
Pun intended.
Very intended. And I think that's the beauty of it is it gets it, talk about your elephant, right? It allows you to start approaching conversations that you really haven't talked about, this dance, because you're owning your side first. So there's this gracious entry place into what has been kind of volatile. And you start to recognize your role in it and how when you take responsibility for that, or just alter it slightly, even like you will still be bent the same way, right? You will, if you learn to fight as a child and that was successful, then when you go into fight or flight, you will fight because your body will innately choose the coping mechanism that last worked or worked best. So if fighting worked for you as a kid, you'll probably be the one who starts fights in your marriage. If fleeing worked for you as a kid, like getting out of there, then you will probably be the avoidant one in the marriage that like you get into conflict and you're out. Like you don't want to talk about it. You just go quiet. That makes sense. And yet there is this, we can be aware of our tendencies and yet still take action to override them. And once you understand your dance, and we just did an intensive last week or week before, with a couple and just walking through their dance with them. And it's one of the most helpful things. Like we put it on this giant flip chart, on the wall, because you look at it and it's like all of the things that have felt so just chaotic and confusing and like, we're just in this yuck and we fight all the time, or we don't feel safe with each other. We're just disconnected. And then you see it in the pattern and you call out this whole dance and it's like, oh yeah, that's it. That's exactly what we do. And every time that we think it's like a different scenario, we just keep doing this. We just get back on our little hamster wheel and do the same thing. And somehow that's just so, puts your mind at so much ease when you realize we just have to change that and to something that's actually true. So to converting this, it basically becomes a cycle of lies, which the enemy will come in and everything that he speaks to you in each of those dance steps, it's all a lie. Every one of them is a lie. And so what we do is then we replace it with what is true. And once you can actually identify what is true in each of those dance steps, who you really are, how your spouse really views you, it changes everything, because you realize there's an entirely opposite way of being with one another that's based on truth and not lies.
And I mean, and the key there is, and what Christy's talking about is there's a couple where both parties are willing to look at, oh yes, I do.
Yeah,
the truth is I actually really do love you. And this is just my really bad attempt at getting you to love me back. And but what's underlying it is a really pure motive. I just am not really good at my execution. And that's a lot of us.
Well, that's your defensive strategies, right? They don't let you. That's them speaking and not the true heart of the person.
And so I think what's important there is if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I don't know if I can get my spouse to do this.
Yeah.
See if they'll listen to this podcast episode, first of all. But I think second of all is, again, you've got to take 100% responsibility for your role. And that's so difficult. And that's so hard to do. And I would say start by going back and listening to last week's episode on, it was actually called Where Do I Find the Time? But, that would be, where do I find the time to get the reserves within me to be able to meet with a spouse who isn't willing to change, to love a spouse who isn't willing to change, to where do I get the time to do that? That would be an episode, I think, to start with in that regard. And just to let you know, like, we're with you in that. Like, we see you, we hear you. That is so difficult because it really does require two people. I think a lot of times when you get two people doing this, man, the sky's the limit. It is amazing to watch couples who come in to do an intensive or we get to coach, where you get both spouses involved, where you're just like, wow, you see the growth immediately. And I would just I think the biggest question I would ask if your spouse is listening to this, or you get your spouse to listen to this and you've been unwilling, you're the spouse who's been unwilling, I would just simply ask the question, what's the unwillingness about? What is keeping you from wanting to pursue your spouse's heart? What is keeping you from wanting intimacy or keeping you from wanting joy in your marriage? Is it hurt? Is it pain? Is it, I'm just saying, answer that question. What is it that's keeping me from it? And is that thing that's keeping me from it really as important as the love of my family, as the love of the is what is keeping me from it really as important as the love of my family? I think that there is a lot that is tugging at us and keeping us from truly entering into relationship with our spouse. And I think a lot of time it is our own self-consciousness. It is our own feeling of shame that we haven't showed up before. Like, even for me, times where I wasn't praying with Christi, where I just felt ashamed about it, which kept me from wanting to do it even more. I think there's a lot of times where we failed our spouse, where we're like, I just haven't been, I haven't been as I haven't communicated well. I haven't loved my spouse well. I haven't treated my spouse all that great. And, entering into that and admitting and being sorrowful, like actually being repentant, actually being apologetic can feel fake because your spouse is like, yeah, you've done this before. And I would just simply say for the both of you, if you're listening to this, to sit with one another with a genuine heart and look at each other and say, I mean it. Like, I want to take the next best step. And that could be reaching out to us. That could be reaching out to a therapist. We can help you find a therapist in your local area. I would just really encourage you to just say yes to the next step. Because when you're willing, holy cow, it's not even anything that we do. It's your willingness that actually changes everything. It really is.
And just to say, like, the sky really is the limit. And is there a world in which, could there be a world in which you might be willing to address the thing that's holding you back? Could that be just a potential? Because sometimes we just have so pushed that into the corner, like it's just set in stone. Like we're so staunch. Either we've been hurt or we're angry or we're still harboring this pain or this shame. And it's like we have so bonded to that thing that we're not willing to look at something from a different lens. But I would just ask, would you be willing to consider a world in which we could pull that thing out and look at it and maybe start to put a little distance between you and it? Because when we start to separate ourselves from the things that we've carried from, and that be that pain, be that hurt or shame, resentment, anger, we start to realize we are not it. We aren't the same. And we can start to look at it for what it is. And I will tell you that thing can heal, and it will heal. It will take some time, but first we have to be willing to detach ourselves from it and actually address it. And if that is you, I don't know who we're speaking to right now, but I would just go to our website, famousathome.com. This is work we love to do. And it is a joy for us. And so we do intensives with the married couples where you fly into Nashville. We also do online sessions. I do sessions with women. And I just find it is one of our greatest joys. So if you are in a place where you are listening and you're like, I think I'm ready. I think I want help. Or I don't want to say help like you're forlorn. We have lots of couples and lots of people that come. They're great. They just want to get better. Also awesome. Like that's us. Like that's who we are. And I think that just up levels your whole family.
I was going to ask you a question as we close. So let me just recap this. So what's going on within your spouse's heart matters more than what's going on between the two of you. Focus on what's going on within your spouse's heart. I didn't say this, but I'm going to say it. James 1:19 and 20 are probably the two most sanctifying verses in all of Scripture for being connected with each other and doing this. And that is, be quick to listen, be slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Whew, that's a heavy one. Be quick to listen. 2 ears, one mouth for a reason. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Christi, so then name your opponents, talk about your dance, and take responsibility for your role in the dance. Christi, what do you think is the single greatest tool or change that we have made? What's the single greatest change that you and I have made that has helped us be more connected in these last few years than we were in years prior? What do you think that would be? If you want, I threw that out there totally without prep.
There was no prep. So I really didn't know what your question was going to be. I'm going to say, for me, I would say it's healing my own story.
Okay.
And I think for you is the same. In my view, that us doing the work to heal our own wounds so we show up so differently.
well, that's what I was going to say is I think it's the way we show up. I think we are so much quicker to look at our own role. I think you and I are both so much quicker to take responsibility for our own role rather than getting defensive.
I don't think I blame you anymore or get defensive. Do I?
Well, I don't know that I'd ever say never, but no, you don't. Absolutely not. Not like you used to.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say never because I don't know that I don't ever blame you either. Like we're human, we do it. But not like you used to. But that's
not my like viewpoint of like it's your fault.
It's your fault.
It's all your fault.
It used to always be my fault.
I was so protective of me, and had to do the work to understand. And that term, by the way, I had someone say that to me. A girl who was a client now, and she was like, "I finally understand what it means when people say to do the work." Like doing, people say like, oh, I did my own work. And she's like, I was always like, ugh, like, what does that mean? She's like, I actually get now what that means. And I was like, yeah, that is a really strange saying that we do throw out there. But I think what that means is the willingness to sit in hard places of your story and actually look at them and be like, huh. And with someone, I think with grace and love who can guide you through it, to what God was actually doing and to redeem the parts that hurt and to heal those places. That's the work.
Yeah.
But so often we don't do the work, again, in air quotes, because we're just like blasting on through. And by blasting on through, that was like, I blamed him because it's not my fault because I'm not looking at me. Like,
well, you definitely weren't.
And so I would say that's my answer.
Yeah. I think we're much faster to be able to take responsibility for our stuff and see our role in the conflict. And I think it's been a big game changer. There are times we still have tense moments, but
my identity isn't on the line, or my sense of self isn't on the line anymore. That like, if I'm wrong, this is like a disaster.
And I felt that totally.
I can now be like, that was on me. I was totally wrong there.
Yep.
And I'm okay saying that. Like I really am.
I mean, literally at our wedding, your cousins did a skit to the song, I Can Do Anything Better Than You. Like that was our
we are both type A competitive. We were athletes who, and I don't feel that with you anymore.
I don't feel that with you anymore. We're not each other's enemies.
Okay. When we were bike riding the other day though, and at some point I looked over at him, I was like, can you please slow down? Cause I can barely keep up. And he was like, oh, I was just going fast cause you were.
I thought you wanted to go fast.
I was trying to keep up with you. And I was like, I'm really tired. Can we not do this now?
That's really good.
It was funny.
Oh, yes. So if you want more information on becoming teammates in marriage rather than enemies in marriage, remember this too. Your spouse is your greatest teammate, not your greatest enemy. The enemy, the real enemy, would love to get you to think that your spouse is your real enemy, but he or she is not. Your spouse is your greatest teammate. Check out the Famous at Home book to go deeper. And you can also reach out to us if you have any questions about coaching or counseling or anything like that. We will definitely get you connected
or intensives
to the best place possible.
We love those
for you. So
there are next steps.
There are next steps. Yes. So take that next step. And
that was good.
I think it's fantastic. Till next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will ever walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home. We love you.